Hi, my name is Berumen, and this is my story. I was born in 1982, and I grew up in the East Los Angeles area and Northeast Los Angeles area, primarily one of the neighborhoods known as Frogtown, and also Boyle Heights. I grew up with two parents, one parent, Christine, and another parent, Jesus. Both of them were active gang members, active participants. They didn't play a small role. They were heavily influenced by the neighborhood. And one thing that was very important to them was for their children to understand their traditions as well. I have a brother who's 1 year older than myself, and I have a twin brother. And growing up with my brothers, it was actually a really exciting time to be able to have two people that you can relate with and to experience life together. One of the main issues that I experienced was consistently on a daily basis, I would see gang involvement, I would see drug use, I would experience a lot of dysfunction. At a young age, one of the things that I didn't understand was it wasn't normal. But for me, it felt normal every single day to be able to spend time with my parents and to hear them talk about their gang experience. On several events, one of the things that I do remember is my mother was heavily involved with drug use and gang participation. My earliest memory with her was I would go with her, get inside of a truck, and the first thing she would say is, one, remember that cops are not your friends, and two, if we see the cops, make sure that you let us know that they're on their way. And she would take us to places, homes, and have us go and knock on the front door to see if anybody was there. And as soon as we came back and told her that nobody answered, she would have one of us get into the window, a small window. I was super small, and I would go to the front, open up the door, and then wait in the truck while her and my uncle would go inside and decide to burglarize. At the time, I didn't really understand what was really happening or how it was affecting my life. But what I did understand was that I enjoyed spending time with my mother. And this is one of the ways that we had bonded. My father was in and out of my life. He would come as he wanted. And I really loved my father. My father was somebody I would look up to. And the reason why I would look up to him was he was very calm, very easygoing. One of the things that I would notice most about him was he didn't have any kind of violence inside of him. And anytime he spent time with his family or his children, he would give us a lot of love and a lot of appreciation for us being his children. But what I didn't realize in the background was my father was extremely violent. He was known for being on the streets and having a reputation for if you mess with him, then he's definitely going to make sure that he has some type of retaliation. He didn't speak much about it, and it's where I got a lot of my qualities and characteristics from. I was a very quiet child growing up. I had a lot of friends, very popular in school, and one of the things I enjoyed most was I enjoyed fighting. And at the time, I didn't realize the reason why I enjoyed fighting was because I was dealing with a lot of frustration, irritation, and anger growing up based off of my home situation. I didn't like the fact that my mother was a heroin user. I didn't like the fact that my father was in and out of my life. And it was really easy for me to get those things. It was easy for me to get drugs, and it was easy for me to get weapons. When I would go to school, anytime somebody would make a comment or remark related to my family, the first thing that I would do was act aggressive and decide to fight. I loved and enjoyed fighting for a few reasons. One, it gave me popularity, and then two, it allowed me to be able to vent. Those are the type of things that eventually led me to getting involved with drug use. I started smoking marijuana at a very young age. The reason why I liked marijuana was it was completely different from heroin use. When I would see my mother on heroin, to me it was tragedy. And when I seen people smoking marijuana, I seen this very happy, very lively, very eventful type of drug. And with that, I didn't realize that it was going to eventually lead me down to drinking alcohol. I drank alcohol from the age of 12 years old to 16. And a lot of the times that I drank it was girls, it was drugs, and it was friends. And most importantly, it was my brother, it was my two brothers. I did the majority of my things that I was involved in criminally or drug use with my two brothers. If I didn't have them with me, I didn't feel like I was at home. I moved from one place to another. I went from East Los Angeles to Northeast Los Angeles, from Avenue 43rd to Victorville, back down to Eagle Rock. I went to several different elementary schools. I went to 3 different middle schools, and I eventually went to 2 different high schools. I was expelled in 7th grade. I was kicked out of homeschool. Who gets kicked out of homeschool? I used to attend homeschool 1 time a week to take a test, and because of the fact that I was from Los Angeles, and I was going to a place where it was men who were from Inland Empire. They didn't like the fact that I was from LA, and that was a fight. And the reality is I was willing to fight with anybody regardless of where they were from or where they were not from. It was, again, one of the ways that I was able to deal and cope with my home life and my home situation, for sure. So this house right here, it actually brings back a lot of memories. The table that I'm sitting at, my grandfather, my grandmother, they used to sit here consistently. This is where they would make sure that we would have meals. My grandfather, my grandmother were traditional Mexicans. Anytime you entered into their home, they would make sure that you're fed, even if they didn't know you. In the back, they started a church, a Catholic church for the community. At that time, they didn't have anywhere to be able to bring together their Catholic religion, and they decided to bring that here to the neighborhood. Growing up in this home was really eventful. You had a couple things going on. You had my grandparents who were giving out some really good home life traditions, and then you also had a large number of gang members who would consistently come in and out of this house. My grandparents were so accepting to the point where they would overlook who these people were and what kind of qualities and characteristics they had, and would embrace them like they were family. One of the things that I remember most is anytime I walked outside of this front door, you'd have to be cautious and aware of your surroundings. At any moment, you could find yourself in a situation where tragedy could happen. And across the street in the park, it's a beautiful park. And the reality was, at that time, you wouldn't even be able to feel comfortable or safe to walk around, play baseball, enjoy some of the playground, take your kids, take your children there to be able to have some fun. For the most part, once you entered into the doors of my grandparents' house, you were safe, you were comfortable, and this is where I would spend most of my time feeling the comfort and love of home. So my incarceration actually started a lot sooner than I was arrested. I started committing crime at a very young age, and it started with mischief. I would go out and I would break windows. I would break into cars. I would steal clothing. I would go into General Hospital. I live very close to General Hospital. I would enter into General Hospital looking for things to steal. I started selling weed. Weed eventually transitioned into selling rocks. It was very easy for me to figure out how to get weapons. And by the age of 13, I was carrying a gun. At 16, I received a phone call from my mother, and she had told me that she was in an altercation with somebody that she had lived with. And one of the things that I decided based off of the belief that I had at that time was that if anybody did anything to my family, I was going to do something to them. And so I decided to plot and plan how I was going to get my revenge for the idea that somebody had put hands on my mother. And at that time, it was a very distorted belief. The things that I had believed in were propelling me and pushing me to the point that I would go and commit a murder and actually rob this man. I decided to go into this man's home at 4 o'clock in the morning while he was in his driveway playing pool. I walked up with a ski mask and dressed in all black, and I was carrying a .380 Davis with 5 shots in it, and demanded that he give up his money. After taking his money, I began to walk away after everything was done. And at that point, I was still filled with anger. And the same way that I would cope when I was younger, by fighting this time, I decided to take it a step further, and I shot this man 4 times in his chest. And that led to my incarceration. At the age of 16, I was charged with first-degree murder. So after I shot this man for the idea that he had placed hands on my mother, I used a lot of justifications of why I actually went there that night. And the reality is, if I would have asked my mother or asked anybody else if this is something that they would have wanted me to do, they would have said no. And I did this because of how I was feeling and the beliefs that I had at the moment, that if anybody did something to your family, then you do something back to them. And after shooting him, I was arrested 5 minutes afterwards, running out of his home And at that time, they charged me with first-degree murder, felony murder, and I was looking at a life without the possibility sentence. I went to trial for 2.5 years and was convicted. I fought the whole way, believing that somehow I was going to get myself out of this situation, and that was a huge distortion on my part. I would not admit to anything that I'd done. I stayed and remained silent the whole time throughout the trial with the idea that somehow I wasn't going to tell on myself. And I was eventually sentenced to 40 years to life, and on appeal, it was dropped down to 35 years to life. When they had mentioned that sentence, in my mind, I said, I'm never going to get out of prison. At 16 years old, I couldn't even comprehend what 40 years looked like. It's really interesting when it relates to the type of obstacles that I encountered in prison. I walked into an environment where I actually felt comfortable and I felt safe. Walking in there, I was maybe one of the youngest men to walk into prison at 19 years old on a level 4. And when I looked around, most of the men were either 25 to 60 years old. And the reality was, I seen my uncles, I seen my cousins, I seen people who I could relate with. And what it really did, prison, it took my original criminality and it escalated to the point where I was willing to go to any extreme to be a part of that prison population. And I did. By 2005, I ended up committing another crime. I assaulted 3 correctional officers and ended up going to ADSEG and eventually went to the SHU. I spent a few years there and was charged with that crime and was given 8 years for that sentence. I remember going to court, and the one thing when they began offering me plea deals, it didn't matter to me. 8 more years added to a life sentence was nothing. I had no concern about the time. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to get back to my cell and be at a place where I felt comfortable back in prison. I was tired of getting on the bus, getting on the van, and having to go to court for appointments. So for me, the worst part of prison for me was eventually getting in touch with my emotions. The first time that I felt a sense of guilt and I felt a sense of shame for the crime that I committed was the first time that I felt like this was going to be a very traumatic experience for myself. I didn't know how to deal with those feelings. Most of the times I was dealing with those feelings by fighting. And in that environment, you can't just get up and fight anybody that you want. There's definitely a structure and there's a way on how things like that have to happen. And for me, I was unwilling to use drugs as well. So having to sit there with those emotions was very hard and difficult for me, especially when you're sitting there with those emotions and you're isolated and you're unable to talk or speak about them or even understand what that emotion was. So that was the most tragic part. Life-changing moment for me was I was in and out of the hole. My last 115, I ended up in ADSEG for a cell phone. At that time, it was very little in consideration to what everything else that was happening. And I ended up in ADSEG, and I walked out of ADSEG, and I decided that I had to go and get some help. So I put in a form to see the psychologist. And I also put that in because I was seeing a lot of the men that I had grew up with in prison who were my age, 15, 16, and 17, they were all going home. And I couldn't imagine at one point the idea of ever going home. And to actually see people who I grew up with wave by to them and see them walk out that door, it really hit me and struck me. And that was a real life changing moment for me to decide to say it's time for me to do something different. And I also had a conversation with my little sister, and I asked her, I said, if somebody did something to you, like, what would you want me to do? And she said, I would want you to do nothing. I would want you to be here with me and to hold me and to help me out through whatever process I needed to go to be able to get the help and assistance that I needed. And that was a moment that everything that I was doing was for myself, and I wasn't being considerate of other people. And that was a really life-changing moment for me to figure out how do I get to the point where I can not only just change my life, but get out of prison and be successful out here out of prison. I actually was in a lot of different prisons. I started off in Lancaster in 2002. I ended up in Centinela. From Centinela, I went to Tehachapi SHU. I went to Tehachapi Mainline. From Tehachapi Mainline, I went over to New Delano. From New Delano, I went to Ironwood Level 3. From Ironwood Level 3, I went over to Chuckawalla. They closed that down and turned that into an SNY. I went over to Soledad. And from Soledad, I went to Solano. And from Solano, that's where I was able to parole from. I think every prison that I've been in has had its dangers. And when you really think about prison in general, you can go years without anything happening. But the reality is every single day you're sitting back, hypervigilant. You're aware of your surroundings and you're waiting for that one day for something to happen. And in 2012, I think it was the most dangerous situation that I was in. I was involved in a 400-man riot that lasted for over 40 minutes. And the reality was that when you're sitting there, whether you want to be involved or not, you're going to be involved. The other people on the other side are not going to look at you and say or deem you as somebody who's not a threat. And so you were forced or had to be involved for your own safety. And that was maybe one of the most dangerous situations. But overall, every prison that I went to has had some type of danger. I think for the most part, one of the major education programs that I was able to be involved in, I was involved in the offender mentor certification program. And what they do is they help men to get certified as substance use disorder certified counselors. And it's a rigorous process. You have to turn in an application, and out of 300, 400 people that are applying, you're going to be one of maybe 36 who actually get in. And when you go through it, the one major thing that you have to do is some self-discovery. And from self-discovery, you have to become educated when it relates to alcohol and drug field. We're talking about law and ethics, psychology, pharmacology, counseling skills, motivational interviewing, nonviolent communication, helping men recover, just a litany of different educations to be able to help out the prison population with their substance use disorder treatment. I think when the light at the end of the tunnel started to happen was when I really understood who I was as a person, an individual. Beforehand, I was really afraid to walk into the BPH and to be able to explain my story when I didn't even really know my story. And I started to feel a lot more comfortable when I was able to sit there and say, I feel comfortable as a genuine, warm, kind, caring individual who has a plan and a goal. And I want to be able to meet that goal and meet that plan. And that's when I started to really see light at the end of the tunnel. But it still wasn't until the very last day when I was able to hear my name and to walk out and to shake some hands and walk out the door where I felt truly comfortable that this was a possibility. I had a lot of self-doubt, thinking that I was going to be that one individual that somehow got a board date, and then eventually something happened where I was going to find myself spending more time in prison or even the rest of my life in prison. So one of the things, my main focus is I want to be helpful towards others. And after receiving the training and the skills that I did with motivational interviewing and understanding how to be empathetic towards other people, I want to be able to transition that and see if I can help people who are either dealing with substance use issues, who are homeless, who are just looking for somebody to listen. And listening goes beyond just hearing what somebody says, but it's really understanding what they're saying. And I want to be able to have that connection and relationship with people where they're willing to talk about some of the hard things that they experience in life. And I understand that everybody has a story. And that's one of my main goals, is I want to be as helpful and useful as possible and to connect with other people and to let them understand that I'm here for them, and I could hope that they're there for me as well. I think that's the hardest thing to do, especially when you're dealing with somebody who's 13 years old, and to explain to them what it's going to look like 10 or 15 years from now after they're done doing whatever type of drug use or crime that they're involved in, and the repercussions for it. It's really hard as a teenager to be able to see past a few days. And the one thing that I would explain and tell them to is that you're worth doing something else, and that there's a lot of skills out there that you can benefit from. And the things that you're doing, it's not because you're doing them because it's you, but you're doing them because it's a behavior. And you can always change your behavior. And what it takes is to learn some skills and some tools. And when you only have one way to cope, then you're going to choose that one way to cope. And if you were to sit back and read a manual and figure out that if all it takes is some deep breathing and to think about what you're thinking about and change your thinking and to look at yourself as somebody who's valuable, then maybe you might have a chance at doing something different.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that when it relates to freedom and the people who are around you, the people you surround yourself with, it's important to be able to value them and to cherish them. You don't want to wait till the last minute where you're making a phone call and you're hoping that the person on the other side presses 5 just so that you can tell them that you love them. You want to be able to do that now before something like that happens, and prevent yourself from having to go through the experience, and make sure that you're home enjoying a home-cooked meal and not having to get served some food that's coming from a dining hall that you're eventually going to throw away. So I'm here sitting at the LA riverbed, and it's really interesting to be at a place where beforehand I would have never thought that they would have anything like this. They have parks, they have people walking around, and beforehand you couldn't even walk here even if it was 10 o'clock in the morning. And one of the things that I've been thinking about revisiting are some of my tattoos. I have on my left arm, I have my father who passed away in 1999. He was actually shot and murdered in this neighborhood. And I surrounded him with some frogs. He was very fond of Frogtown, and even the idea of frogs in general, it had a lot of significance to him beyond the idea of neighborhood. To him, it meant home, it meant a safe place, it meant a place of comfort. And the reality was he was murdered in the place that he felt most comfortable at. And so I had to, in remembrance of him, and even for me to remember who I was as a person while I was in prison, I want to put his face there so that as time goes on, anytime I was sitting back and thinking about making a poor decision, I would consider him. I put the date that he was murdered. He was murdered on 11/21/1999. It was 3 months after I was arrested. And I also put on the back, I put a Tweety bird. A lot of people, when I first got it, it's a Tweety bird with the Tweety bird holding a frog. And at first people were wondering, like, what was the significance behind that? And I used to call my little sister Tweety bird when she was growing up, and she has a very familiar or similar face to Tweety. And for me, it meant a lot, the significance behind that of having my sister and being able to have her on my arm, where I was considering and thinking about her. So those were initially my first tattoos. And on my right arm, I decided to get Mexican culture. And to me, the Day of the Dead was very significant. It was significant in terms of celebrating life in general. I was on my way of getting out of prison, and I wanted to get something to remember the 25 years that I spent in there. It's really hard not to assimilate into the culture of prison and to want to be a part of it and to leave with something that has some type of meaning. And for me, all of the artwork that I've gotten from the calendar has my birth date in it. The skulls, it represents death and moving on to a new chapter. I have the Quetzalcoatl with the moon just representing the sun and the moon and the universe just in general. I have a Day of the Dead, a girl who's on there who's representative of how you treat women in general and being kind to our Mexican culture and being kind to other people's culture as well, and represented in a way where you're not offending other people. I have a raven on there. The raven's for the purpose to signify death and born back into life. I enjoy playing guitar, so I put a guitar player on there, mariachi, to be able to signify my love for music in general, regardless of what kind of music it is. If you enjoy rap, if you enjoy oldies, if you enjoy country, anything that's significant to you in your life, these are the things that are very significant for me. And going through the process of being in prison for 25 years, the person that I had work on me was somebody that I had a really good relationship, and they actually offered to do the work. So I was able to get it free, and it wasn't free that really caught my attention. What it was being able to walk out of there with something that belonged to somebody else. And it was his work, and he was doing it because of his appreciation and his love for me. And that's the significance behind my tattoos. So we're here in Los Angeles, and I'm overlooking downtown LA, and I can see the 110 freeway, and it's leading over into the riverbed. From the riverbed, this is where I would spend a lot of my time going from East Los Angeles over to Frogtown, and really great memories. I'm spending time with my brothers and being able to rely on them and the support that they were giving, and the encouragement that they were giving despite the situation and the circumstances that we're dealing with, of having a mother who was hooked on heroin and having a father who would dedicate most of his life to his gang activity. Be able to be standing here today and to overlook the city after spending 25 years in prison. So I'm glad that I was able to come out here and build a new memory. The reality is, if you really look, there's more opportunities than harshness. You just have to be willing to seek it out. and to find those opportunities. And when the door opens, you can't shut it on them. You have to be able to keep it open for yourself. So I enjoy this view. This is a great view. I'm actually standing right here for the first time, and I'm looking over. I get to look over what is known as Frogtown. And it's interesting because it goes from one side of the river all the way to the other side of the river. I think this is one of the only neighborhoods that has this type of neighborhood where you have the river as a background. And initially, when I first decided to come out here, I was somewhat intimidated by the fact that it might still be infested with gang involvement and a culture that wasn't going to be suitable for the things that I wanted to accomplish. And I've been pleasantly surprised. It's actually been gentrified majorly, and you get to see people that you would never have ever in your imagination thought that you would see close to this riverbed. They have kayaking, they have yoga, Frogtown yoga. They have a bakery called Frogtown Bakery. They have all these different iconic places where people are willing to come with the premise that it's related to some type of frog without understanding the background or the culture that it came from. And it's actually really great to see people embracing the idea of change. And it's very familiar with myself. I came out here with the idea of doing something different with my life, and to see that the neighborhood I grew up in, it changed. And I'm also somebody that's changed. I have a different idea about life, a different belief system. I get to look at the freeway and look at it in a way where I don't see danger, or I don't see circumstances that are going to cause me to have this type of roadblock. And I'm appreciative. I'm appreciative of this view. So this is actually a great memory. A lot of the memories that I had beforehand, they weren't anything that I could be fond over or decide to share. And I get to share this. I get to share change. I get to share optimism. I get to share hope. And I get to share the idea that freedom is real. Freedom is definitely real. Yeah, I'm really fortunate during my journey, to come across the Offender Mentor Certification Program. I had no thoughts of becoming a substance use disorder certified counselor. I came from a background where the majority of my family were involved with some form of drug use, whether it was alcoholism, using heroin, PCP, rock cocaine. I mean, you name it, some of the harshest drugs that somebody can come across. And while I was in prison, I happened to be encouraged by other men who were in prison, who were getting certified as alcohol and drug counselors, and they thought that I would have the talents or the skills to be helpful or useful to somebody who was dealing with substance abuse issues. And I came across someone who encouraged me to join the Offender Mentor Certification Program, and it was located in Solano. And I really enjoyed being at Soledad. I was being offered a lot of opportunity there, and I took a chance and I took a risk to go someplace where I can better my future. And I ended up going there, and I was a part of a program, an 18-month program, where this thing start off and you work on things that are related to you, a lot of self-help, a lot of internal work. And with the internal work, you eventually figure out that there's a parallel process. And with that parallel process, when you help yourself, you can help somebody else. I was able to learn about law and ethics, motivational interviewing. I was trained in nonviolent communication. I was trained in helping men recover, being able to deal with toxic masculinity, and even being able to offer up tools to other people who are dealing with substance abuse issues. And their issues are related to criminality. A lot of the men who were in prison, they were in prison based off of the fact that they were involved with environments that were fueled or plagued with substance use issues, and then eventually committing crime based off of either being high or wanting to get those drugs. And I dedicated myself to applying a lot of what I learned to help out other men so that maybe one day they can experience this same freedom. And OMCP is what offered that up to me. They helped me to understand about myself and then gave me the tools to be able to go and help others. Yeah, it's really interesting that I get the opportunity to be able to stand over this view, and it's really beautiful. And the reality of it is it's something that I couldn't have done by myself. I've had a lot of help throughout my journey, and there was even some people who I didn't realize they seen potential in me before I could even see potential in myself. I had Kimberly Chu. She was overseeing Offender Mentor Certification Program. She was a CC3 there, and she was invaluable on how I really started to view people in general, and even officers. I would never have had or considered the idea of having a friendship or being mentored by somebody who was an officer, and she was that for me. I've had Loyola Marymount, their law office, the Juvenile Innocence Fair Sentencing Clinic, and they've been very supportive for the last 4 years. They helped me to prepare for board, and beyond preparing for board, they helped me with life just in general. Professor Hawthorne, Marissa Sachs, Elizabeth Berry, Connie, these are all people who were, very, very helpful. And they were the ones who were very instrumental in being able to support me for board. And not only that, the encouragement that they gave me, they told me that I can do it. And one day you're going to be out here, you're going to be free. And there was moments where I had doubt and didn't think that it was going to be possible for me to be able to have the opportunity to experience this. And today here I am, and it's in thanks and in part to people like that. I had Velia Martinez. She was consistently on me. She was a really good critic, positive critiquer, and made sure that I stood on track. I think they're all staff members, officers, lawyers, attorneys who dedicated their time and their efforts to make sure that I get to feel a sense of freedom. And the one person that I have a lot of appreciation for is Mariana Rodriguez. She was the last student attorney to be on my case, and she helped me tremendously. It's not just the time that she spent with me, but the conversations and her willingness to allow me to be vulnerable and to figure out the board process. There was a lot of questions that I had that I didn't have any answers to, and she was willing to sit there and have the patience with me to be able to figure out how to really go to board and answer some questions that were related to me, and beyond just answering the questions, but being able to understand it internally and to be able to come out here and be successful, to have the right coping skills. So I really have a lot of love and appreciation for her as well.